The most important thing to note with this video is that Baldur's Gate 3 is still in early access, and as it progresses, the rules and mechanics will likely continue to change, so this video may not accurately represent the game come official launch. In fact, it likely won't, or perhaps even by next patch. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how Baldur's Gate 3 currently differentiates from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I do want you guys to put your opinions below in the comments, as feedback is obviously very important for early access. Let's jump on in. The first difference that I want to talk about is being able to see your percentage chance to hit your target, or percentage chance that your target will fail their saving throw. If I click on my crossbow and then move the cursor over an enemy, the game will tell me that I have X percentage chance of actually landing that shot on that particular enemy. If I'm using a spell that requires the enemy to do a saving throw to resist its effects, the game tells me that I have X percentage chance of that enemy succumbing to my spell's full effects. Behind the scenes, the calculations going on to come up with that percentage chance are based on 5th edition rules and mechanics. However, the difference here is that in D&D, you don't typically get to see, nor are you told, what your percentage chance is. Dungeon masters will all handle this differently in their own campaigns, but generally speaking, players have to figure out what rolls they need to succeed on their own by paying attention to what rolls hit and what rolls miss in the early stages of a combat encounter. Also in Baldur's Gate 3, you can inspect your enemy by right-clicking on them and clicking Examine. When examining a target, you can see a ton of information about them, from their armor class to their features to their ability scores and more. In 5th edition, learning this type of information about a target oftentimes requires a very particular set of skills to be present in an adventuring party. For example, at level 7 in D&D, a Battle Master fighter gets the ability to spend 1 minute observing a creature to learn more about it. And even with that Battle Master feature, according to the rules, that Battle Master can still only learn a few particular things about their enemy. Personally, I think I'm okay with being able to see the percentage chance to hit, and I think it does more good for the game than harm, especially considering there's so many Baldur's Gate 3 players that don't come from Dungeons & Dragons, and having to go into the combat log and look at all the previous rolls and do that type of math and stuff might be a little bit too much for this particular video game. In terms of examining your enemy and being able to see their attributes, armor class, and other feature type stuff, I think there's some cooler ways that Larian could go about this. Perhaps you have to get within a certain distance of an opponent, and then you can right click on them and examine and go through an investigation check, even if it's kind of like a quick passive investigation check and not an active roll. And if you pass, then you can have information on that creature. This would be really cool. It would require more use of your stealth party members to get up close to creatures to really examine them. I think it would be a lot of fun. Or it could even just be as easy as having to encounter the creature one time, and then in future combat encounters, you'll have the information that you need. But if it stays the way it is, it's not really the end of the world, in my opinion. In Baldur's Gate 3, you currently get a +2 to your attack rolls if you are on the high ground. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there is no such bonus to attack by simply being on the high ground. A DM, of course, could make a ruling or exception in some cases to allow something like this, but generally speaking, simply being on high ground does not help a player's chance to attack. I think this homebrew rule is excellent because it encourages players to be a little bit more tactical with their party formations and party positioning when in combat encounters. Before, Larian had it to where players would get advantage by being on the high ground, and I thought that was way too overpowered, and it also kind of normalized having advantage when advantage is supposed to be something that you have to work hard to get or sacrifice something to get, like a spell slot or something like that. So I think a +2 to attack is the perfect solution to making the environment and party positioning matter without it being too overpowered. Weapon types in Baldur's Gate 3 come with their own special actions. For example, all great swords give players a cleave attack, which allows you to strike multiple enemies in front of you at the cost of your action. And there's also a lacerate attack, which does weapon damage but also causes a target to bleed. Maces will give players an action called concussive smash, which deals damage and dazes targets. In D&D 5e, there are no special actions tied to weapon types. As always, though, a DM has the ability to allow players to do more creative things with their weapons if their players are making great use of their imagination. I like the weapon actions, and I think it does add a little bit more fun to the martial classes, which can feel a little underwhelming for some players, especially players who come from like DOS 2. when you compare like a level 2 or 3 fighter to a level 2 or 3 sorcerer or wizard, you're kind of like, well, I have all these spells, but I don't really have much as a fighter or a barbarian in terms of like actions that you can use each turn. And this does add a little bit more to that. And it also just makes sense to have cool abilities that you should be able to do with one weapon and not another, like being able to hit multiple enemies in front of you with a great axe or a great sword, or being able to concuss somebody with a mace. So I like it. I'm not entirely sure about the balancing of these. We'll have to save that for a future video. In Baldur's Gate 3, if you have party members that land next to each other in the order of turns, you are free to choose whichever one of them you want to go first, and you can even alternate actions and movement. If playing multiplayer, players can actually even go at the same time if this happens. In D&D 5th edition, the order of turns is the order of turns. There's no switching things around, even if party members are consecutive in the initiative order. Really like this homebrew rule. Don't want it changed at all. I've had a lot of fun trying different combinations with party members that are in line in the initiative order. It just makes it, I don't know, we have more control over our party, but at the same time, the initiative still matters because you have to be in order consecutively to take advantage of this. I like it a lot. As of now, with patch 7, Baldur's Gate 3 does not have the dodge action nor the ability for players to ready an action. Dodge in 5th edition allows a player to use their action to impose disadvantage on attacks made against them for a full round of combat. It's a very defensive type of action to take, and very useful if avoiding damage is more important than dishing it out in a particular situation. Readying an action in 5th edition allows a player to react to a perceivable circumstance. If that circumstance plays out, that is the trigger for an action to take place. You're basically storing an action for later use, and if it ends up triggering, it will use up a player's reaction for that round. Now there's several different ways that this can play out, but one quick example would be if a group is waiting for enemies to come through a door, perhaps your archer can't see the enemies yet, but knows that they will likely be coming through the door after their turn is over. And instead of wasting that turn and doing nothing, they could instead ready their ranged attack for the round. And the trigger for that ranged attack going off would be the first enemy that walks through the door and into the archer's line of sight. And if that happens, the player will of course be able to shoot their bow. As for the dodge action, I really want to see this at least tested out in early access. I feel like it can't be insanely hard to implement in this game. It's not really that big of an ask considering everything is already in place to make dodge a possibility. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. There should already be systems in the game to make it happen. I think it'd be really good to try it out, and it would be also, I think it would work good. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be a good action. And like I said, it gives us more defensive options. And when there's times where you feel like you can't make use of anything, you always have dodge, which can't hurt to activate. Readying an action, on the other hand, I would like to see it in the game and test it out, but I'm not really as concerned about it as I am with dodge. It would be cool, but not the end of the world if it doesn't make it in. That's just my opinion. Since we just talked about actions that are missing in Baldur's Gate 3, how about one that BG3 has that doesn't really exist in 5th edition, and that is the dip bonus action. In Baldur's Gate 3, players can dip their weapons into various elements and surface types, the most common being fire, and that weapon will then deal a little extra bonus damage if it hits the target and is used. There's no official dip bonus action in D&D 5th edition. I think I'm good with the dip bonus action being in the game, and it can be fun to use. However, I do think there should be more limitations placed on it, such as not being able to dip your big iron sword into a candle. That doesn't really make too much sense. Since I recently mentioned reactions with the ready action, let's talk about reactions themselves. The way reactions work in Baldur's Gate 3 is quite different than how they work in 5th edition. Now, it does seem likely that Larian will be playing around with the reaction system in future updates, but this video is to talk about the now. In Baldur's Gate 3, players can toggle on or off multiple reactions on their turn if they have those reactions. If a trigger occurs for one of those reactions, that reaction will automatically go off using up the player's reaction for that round. So if you toggle on Opportunity Attack and Hellish Rebuke together, if an enemy walks out of your immediate area without using the disengage action and you have a melee weapon equipped, your character will automatically strike at that opponent, doing an attack of opportunity and using up your reaction for that round. If you don't have attack of opportunity toggled on, that reaction will not go off at all. You have to wait until your turn to toggle it on. That's not really a reaction the way that it currently is. It's more so a plan ahead type of thing, but you still don't really have full control over what is used if you toggle on multiple reactions. Like I said, if your attack of opportunity goes off, you can't use Hellish Rebuke in that same round, and perhaps you want to use Hellish Rebuke and not use attack of opportunity in a certain situation. We don't really have control over that right now. In D&D 5th edition, a player does not have to toggle on or off reactions. They are always available for use when triggered, as long as that player has a reaction left for the round. The player has complete control over choosing to use or not use a reaction in the heat of a battle, in the actual moment that the reaction is going to take place in. Not really a huge fan over the way that Larian has reactions currently implemented, and I'm really looking forward to them trying something. I think they probably are, but I really hope that they do, especially considering that there's a lot of reaction spells that are currently not in the game, such as the shield spell, and not really having full control over the shield spell is pretty tough, and it can be pretty brutal. You want to be able to control that in the actual moment and not have to decide whether you want to toggle it on and off, expecting something to possibly happen. I hope Larian tries it the 5th edition way. We'll see what turns out with it. Next up is jumping and shoving. Jumping in Baldur's Gate 3 costs the player a bonus action, and it also eats at their movement bar. In 5th edition, jumping does eat away at your movement bar, but it does not cost the player a bonus action. Shoving in Baldur's Gate 3 also costs a bonus action, and if you have a strong character shoving a fairly light opponent, it can knock that opponent quite a ways away. It's a very powerful tool at your disposal, especially if you're playing a strong character. In D&D 5th edition, shoving does take into account strength with strength checks, but shoving an enemy costs an action, not a bonus action, and it will only do one of two things: knock an enemy prone or knock them back 5 feet. So in 5th edition, it's much less powerful overall, and since it costs an action, I would say it's also pretty resource intensive compared to Baldur's Gate 3, where it's simply a bonus action. The way Larian currently has jump, I think I'm good with. It seems to work well, costing a little bit of your movement bar and also your bonus action. As for the shove, I've actually come around to not necessarily hating shove costing a bonus action ever since Larian did nerf the shove a little bit. Before, even like the really weak characters could shove enemies super far, and now it's a lot more strength based. With that said, I still think that Larian should tone down the distance that you're able to shove an enemy. If you're going to allow players to get one-shot kills with their bonus actions by shoving enemies off cliffs, I think it should require a little bit more effort and awareness, and it should require the player to really work that battlefield formation to be rewarded with the possibility of getting that one-shot kill with a bonus action. One of the first differences that I noticed right away when playing early access back in October of 2020 is the change in spell preparation. In Baldur's Gate 3, classes that use prepared spells can swap in and out the spells that they want to have prepared at any time outside of combat. All you got to do is click on your spell list, then select and deselect the spells that you want. In 5th edition, changing your list of prepared spells can only be done when you finish a long rest. This is a fairly significant change that Larian did here. Personally, I think I would prefer it to require a long rest in order to switch up your prepared spells. That just makes way more sense as to what prepared spells actually are according to their definition and how they work. And also, if we think about non-combat situations where you might want to use utility type spells, prepared casters have access to their entire spell list. All you got to do is select and deselect a few spells. And this further divides the lines between the balance of the casters that use known spells and the casters that use prepared spells. Now, one thing that I thought of, and I'd be very curious to hear what you guys think about this, is having short rests allow the player to switch up their prepared spells. This would not only give more meaning to the short rest button, but it also kind of makes more sense in terms of what prepared spells are according to their definition and how they work. And requiring a short rest also still leaves some sort of cost associated with switching up your prepared spells. You only have 2 short rests per long rest, so you can't just always switch up your prepared spells. And also, you have to give up your short rest, which you might want to use for heals. So let me know what you guys think about that. It might be a happy medium to somewhat satisfy both sides of where you stand on how prepared spells should work. Be very interested in hearing your guys' opinions. While on the topic of spells, in Baldur's Gate 3, wizards can actually learn cantrips from scrolls, and they can also scribe any spell from any class's spell list to their own spellbook. So a wizard can officially learn Guiding Bolt, and not to mention all of the healing spells in the game. In 5th edition, cantrips cannot be learned from scrolls, and a wizard can only learn spells that are on the wizard's spell list, unless of course they multi-class. I definitely prefer the way that 5th edition does it here with the cantrips. Wizards already learn enough spells and cantrips. They don't need to be able to learn every cantrip that they come across from a scroll. It should be a decision that you make while you're leveling up. As for wizards being able to learn spells outside of the wizard's spell list through scrolls and scribing them into their spell book, this is perhaps one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a complaint, because I think Larian is maybe just using it for testing purposes the way that it is right now, but wizards being able to find a healing word scroll or a guiding bolt scroll and then learning that spell officially is just a big no, in my opinion. A big no. I'm trying to be intimidating right now. It's a big no, Larian. Wizards being able to learn healing spells and holy spells really just kind of kills the purpose of having clerics and druids and classes that are kind of designed for those particular spells. It kills the roles of classes and ruins the purpose of many of the classes. And wizards already have access to so many spells. There's no reason why we should give them every single spell in the game, also considering that a lot of scrolls are really easy to come across or buy. So no for me on this one. Wizards should only be able to learn spells or scribe spells that are on the actual wizard's spell list. In 5th edition, there are also spells that have the ritual tag on them, and classes that are able to use these spells can choose to spend a longer time casting them. And the benefit of doing so is that at the sacrifice of some time, that spell will now not cost you one of your limited spell slots. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't really have ritual spells. However, there is one example of Larian doing something along these lines. If you play as a ranger and choose Beast Tamer as your natural explorer, you can then cast the Find Familiar spell as a cantrip, which of course makes it not cost a spell slot. This is basically casting it as a ritual spell in video game form, and I'm okay with the way that Larian might handle this. It would be cool to see them put more spells, or more spells that turn into cantrips for rituals, into the game. While on the topic of familiars, if you summon a familiar in Baldur's Gate 3, you cannot have any other animal companions summoned with you. So a Beastmaster Ranger that has the Find Familiar spell cannot have their familiar and animal companion summoned at the same time. In 5th edition, you can summon them both. However, familiars in 5th edition cannot attack, while they can attack in Baldur's Gate 3. While I definitely would prefer to be able to have a familiar and an animal companion out at the same time, Larian would have to think about the balance of this a little bit, considering that the Baldur's Gate 3 familiars can attack, and they have actually some decent abilities associated with them, so Larian would have to figure out how to balance that. But it would be way more cool to have your little rat out and also your wolf companion. Lastly, on the topic of spells, in Baldur's Gate 3, spells do not require physical components to cast them, while in 5th edition, you'll need verbal, somatic, or material components, or a combo of those when casting a spell. For example, Flaming Sphere in 5th edition says it requires verbal, somatic, and material components, and next to this it lists out the material components that you need to have on your character to cast the spell. While verbal is kinda a thing in Baldur's Gate 3, considering that you can silence casters, overall spells in Baldur's Gate 3 do not have somatic or material component requirements. I think this is a good decision on Larian's part, as that might just be a little bit too it'd be kind of annoying always having to have specific ingredients and all sorts of things on your character just to cast your spells. I think the way they're going about it right now is better for this video game, even though some of you guys out there might prefer the more hardcore approach, and you guys know me, I like games that are a little bit more hardcore. I think it's better to keep it the way that it is right now, and I noticed in Celeste a lot of people turned these things off because you had the option to. And the last more notable change that I'll talk about in this video is to the help action. In Baldur's Gate 3, if a character uses the help action on a downed party member, the downed party member will be revived or lifted up. In 5th edition, using the help action just gives advantage to another player on their next ability check. So if you use help on a downed party member, it will only give them advantage on their next death saving throw instead of just straight up reviving them. I would actually prefer that it only gave advantage on death saving throws. I think it makes for more intense situations, and there's already far too many ways to pick up your downed friendlies right now because you can throw potions, the help action. Having all of that kind of takes away from the need for that healing class and the purpose of some of those healing classes, but overall not really that big of a deal even if it stays the way it is. Let me know what you guys think. There are of course some more changes to things such as spells like Chromatic Orb and Mirror Image. There's some changes to some of the classes, as the Ranger is different in BG3 than it is in 5e. The Wildheart Barbarian subclass is a little different than the 5th edition Totem Warrior, but for the most part I think I covered the major, more notable, perhaps even divisive ones in this video. There's really no point in talking about the missing spells, cantrips, and even classes and subclasses in this particular video, because Larian is purposefully holding back some content for the official release. So let me know what you think about all of this below in the comments. Do you agree with my opinion? Do you agree with Larian? Do you agree with 5th edition? Do you hate me? Come on, you shouldn't hate me. Do you hate me? As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I really appreciate those of you that made it all the way to the end. Links to my community Discord server will be below in the video description, and I also have an early access feedback channel on my Discord server that some of the Larian mods do check on my server to try to report that feedback to other areas. So feel free to join over there, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.